Good afternoon and welcome to the Town Hall to discuss the upcoming election where a group of graduate students will vote on whether or not they would like to form a union. We are streaming this Town Hall live at liveevents.psu.edu. We've been collecting your questions for a few weeks now. We've already received more than 60 questions. You can still submit questions now and throughout the Town Hall, either written on paper and passed to the ends of the aisle or online to questions@psu.edu. I may combine or condense some questions if we get duplicates or for time purposes, but I will retain the heart of the questions you submit. As we are streaming this live to several places throughout the Commonwealth and across campus, we'd like to ask that everyone please follow the directions for submitting questions so that the people in the streaming audience can hear the questions and hear the answers. Answering your questions today will be Executive Vice President and Provost Nick Jones and Dean of the Graduate School Regina Vasilatos-Younken. We've asked them each to say a few words, and then we'll get right to your questions. Sir?
Thanks, Ben. Thank you all for being here today. This is an amazing turnout, and we're glad that you're here. So thanks for showing up. This is a very important topic for many graduate students, so I really am honestly pleased to see so many of you here in person for this discussion, as well as those of you who are joining us through live stream to learn more about the potential graduate student unionization and the impact it could have on you personally and academically. Dean Vasilatos-Younken and I are here today as with many of our regular town hall meetings to do our best to provide you with accurate information and to answer the many questions you've been submitting related to graduate student unionization. To start, I'd like to share just a quick update of where we are in this process. As I'm sure many of you know, that's why you're here, in February, a hearing examiner from the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board, the PLRB, issued a decision that a group of graduate students could hold an election to determine if they wish to be represented by a union. This is a group of about 3,800 graduate students who are on assistantships and traineeships across multiple campuses of Penn State. 2 weeks ago, tentative dates were proposed for an election in mid-April. Specific details about the election are still being worked out by representatives from the university, the PLRB, and the proposed union. As most of you know, university leadership and its faculty have expressed many times that we have always viewed our graduate students as individuals who have come to Penn State as students seeking advanced degrees, not as employees who came for a job. As a premier research university, the hallmark of graduate education at Penn State is the individualized training each of you receives and your unique one-on-one relationships with faculty advisors. We believe having a third party, such as a union, inserted in this relationship would not best serve your academic needs or professional growth. I want you to know that we advocate on your behalf daily topics that impact your lives. These range from taxes and immigration issues to harassment concerns and health issues. And we continue to work to put in place protocols and processes to more easily report any concerns that could impede your education here at Penn State. Unions are designed to represent the interests of a collective whole. The individualized mentoring and professional development opportunities that are the hallmark of a graduate education experience at Penn State may be impeded by the representation of a union. Right now, with this upcoming election, we hope that all of you, in fact, all affected students, will focus on three things. First, get the facts and avoid misinformation. Second, consider all points of view, but form your own opinion. And third, vote in the election. I can't stress this enough. We urge all eligible graduate students to vote when the election occurs. Every voice is important, and every voice counts towards the outcome. A simple majority, no matter how small, of those who actually vote determines the result for all graduate students, even those who don't vote, and even for future students who have not yet applied to our graduate degree programs.
Thank you, Provost Jones. I'm also happy to see so many graduate students here and online today. I hope this session helps you to gain clarity on questions we know many of you have at this time. And I want to reiterate what Provost Jones said. All of you who are eligible to vote should educate yourselves on the topic, hear from all sides, make your own decision, and most importantly, vote on the day of the election. Before we start answering questions, I would like to share 3 overarching thoughts with you. First, as Provost Jones said, the hallmark of graduate education at Penn State is the individualized training each of you receives. And that comes with flexibility to accommodate your different needs. We are concerned that a union could take away from your educational experiences. What does this mean? It means that unions generally adopt a one-size-fits-all approach. A collective bargaining agreement would apply to all graduate assistants and trainees and could limit the flexibility of students, faculty mentors, and the graduate school to tailor assignments, research projects, time spent on research, professional development opportunities, and financial support packages to the needs of individual students. Second, graduate students come to Penn State to earn an advanced degree. It's our goal to help you be successful in this endeavor. And in order to enable you to focus on your education, gain professional skills, and successfully complete your degree, substantial support packages in the form of assistantships are provided. These include a stipend, full tuition remission, subsidized high-quality health insurance that provides comprehensive coverage, and summer tuition assistance. The total graduate student funding packages range on average from between $50,000 and $65,000 per fiscal year. And there is no guarantee with a union that these packages will remain as they are or how they might change. With collective bargaining, some elements of this may increase, some could decrease, and some may remain the same. And third, Penn State has a long history of working collaboratively and positively with our graduate students. You have the ability to actively participate in university governance and decisions at all levels, with representation through the Graduate and Professional Student Association, on Graduate Council, the Faculty Senate, the Board of Trustees, the Student Insurance Advisory Board, and a host of other groups. In addition, as individual students, there are many avenues to voice your concerns and address problems that may arise, and we want to hear from you. We have an Associate Dean for Graduate Student Affairs who serves as an ombudsperson and advocate for all graduate students across the university. Dr. Sarah Ades, who is here today, works with individual students to find solutions to their problems and address their issues and concerns. The essential factor underlying the effectiveness of all of these, your individualized educational experiences, the tailored support packages, a direct voice in governance, is the ability to work directly with you as graduate students. You are not a homogeneous group. Your needs vary by many factors, including the culture of your fields, but most importantly as individuals. And I firmly believe the opportunity to resolve differences is greatest through direct communication in a collegial environment. Regardless of the outcome of the election, our graduate students should know how immeasurably you are valued, and that the university will always strive to do our very best to improve the quality of graduate education and the educational experience for all of you, our graduate students. Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you all for attending. I'd like to remind you one more time, since some people came in late, if you'd like to submit questions, you can do so throughout the town hall Please either write them down on the pieces of paper that were provided and pass them to the end of the aisles and they'll be collected, or email them to questions@psu.edu. And we'll jump right into the questions now. First off, we've gotten this in several forms from several different people already. But why does the university have such strong opposition to a graduate student union?
I would start by saying our focus is again, first and foremost on the educational experience of our students. We think of you as students. You come here for a degree, and our primary concern is to preserve the unique aspects of graduate education, which are very, very different from other forms, other models of education. All of you who have already begun your graduate program, some of you are getting close to finishing, you recognize how different it is from your undergraduate experience. It involves a very individual type of experience. Your academic program, the nature of the courses you take, in many cases for PhD students, those are different for individuals within the same program. The types of professional skills you develop depending on your research and your scholarship. Every aspect of your educational experience is highly individualized, and uniquely you work one-on-one with your faculty advisors, your mentors. And that is the focus that we are concerned about, because we want it to continue to be the premier graduate programs that we can possibly offer. They are highly ranked, and we attract the best students like you to come here because of that. And we really believe that it doesn't lend itself to the nature of a union environment.
Jean and I will avoid both answering each of your questions through the evening so we can get through as many as possible, but this is a very important question, and so I will just weigh in for a moment on that to reinforce what Dean Younken just said. I believe that all of you in this room applied to Penn State to get a graduate education as students here. You did not apply to Penn State to come here and be employees. The importance and uniqueness of the relationships that you all develop with your advisors is what makes this experience unique. It's what makes it meaningful, and ultimately it is what will lead to your future success. And that is something that we as a university value, and we think it is worth protecting. And we want to make the best case that we can for you to really preserve the quality of that experience.
We've had a question submitted from the audience, and they ask that they have read that union membership will be optional, and if they opt out, will the decisions made by the union still affect them?
So let me clarify. The bargaining unit that was identified by the hearing examiner of PLRB were all graduate students with assistantships. So it doesn't matter if you have a teaching assistantship, research assistantship, whatever the nature of your assistantship responsibilities. That is the identified bargaining unit, and students on training grants, traineeships. Those are the individuals, if the outcome of the election is to have union representation, who would be in the bargaining unit. Whether you choose to be dues-paying members of the union or not, you are in the bargaining unit, and any collective bargaining agreement will apply to you, all of you who will have an assistantship or a traineeship in any semester. There may be differences that come with dues-paying members or not. In most cases, individuals who do not pay dues and are not therefore members of the union may not have the right to vote on important things like collective bargaining agreements or a decision to strike or even the union leadership. So there can, in most cases, be a differentiation of your ability to have a voice in decisions that will affect you, because that collective bargaining agreement, if the election is to have union representation, applies to you whether you are in the union and paying dues or not.
You mentioned a strike in that answer, and we've had several questions in the last few days. If a strike should occur and a union has been established, what happens to students' research or time towards graduation?
It's very difficult right now to predict what would happen, even what would be the conditions for a strike, because that really is determined by the union and its rules. But if a strike hypothetically were to occur, and they do happen, they have happened at many universities with graduate assistant unions, and they have lasted varying amounts of time, even as much as 4 to 5 weeks in some cases, then students would have to make a decision in Pennsylvania. There is no such thing as preventing striking workers from choosing to work. And so students could choose to do that, but there may again be penalties from the union. We can't tell you that. That would be up to the union rules. In many unions, there are fines or other types of penalties. But we can say that if students are not able to participate in their assistantship responsibilities, if they choose to honor the strike, as they say, then that will have significant impact on your ability to make progress in your degree, especially for those students who have research assistantships. And I will tell you, those are the majority of the total assistantships at Penn State. It is predominantly research assistantships. Out of that 3,800 number that Provost Jones mentioned, almost 2,200 of them are research assistantships, and primarily in STEM fields. And so it is very possible with a strike, depending on the length of it and the conditions, and whether you as individuals, if you're involved, choose to participate or not, if that could have some impact. I will tell you, I have been at Penn State a long time. I was here when there was a strike years ago. And in any event, it's disruptive. It's disruptive to the institution, it's disruptive to the people involved, it's disruptive to individuals who are not directly involved but can be impacted, like students in classes otherwise.
I think it's fair to add too that one of the responsibilities of Dean Younken and the grad school is to work with deans and other academic leaders across the institution always, every day, to ensure that any impediments to you successfully navigating the path to degree completion in a reasonable time are enhanced. No impediments, everything as smooth as possible. No question, even though the specific outcomes are a little bit difficult to predict, that there would be negative potential impacts on your ability to complete your degree in a time frame that you control.
Thank you. Here's a question from the audience, and they ask that according to the CGE website, there's a study that says there would be no adverse effects by adding a union. How do you respond to that?
We know that this study by Rogers et al., 2013, has been cited quite often, and because we are a research university, all of you are scholars, I want to say that that study has no applicability to the situation here at Penn State. It was conducted based on survey data from the Chronicle of Higher Education back in the early 2000s. The total sample size was very small, about 516, and within that sample group, the number of fields, there were 5 fields sampled, 5. I want to tell you we have 200 fields of study at Penn State. Among those 5 fields, only 2 were in STEM. And within that sample, the number of actual research assistants was less than 200. Even the authors of that paper acknowledged that one of the biggest limitations was the inability to apply the results to physical sciences, biological sciences, and in the context of research in particular. So you really do have to look as students who are in research degree programs, you look at the literature and you always want to be sure that there are comparable methodologies there. So it is not possible. And I want to say broadly that even as we've looked across peer institutions, many of you have heard Big Ten institutions do have graduate assistant unions, and they do, about 6 of them do, but they are predominantly or exclusively teaching assistants. The situation here, by virtue of what the hearing examiner of the PLRB decided, is almost unprecedented because it included all assistantships, no matter what the focus. And the scale of our potential collective bargaining unit and the dominance of research assistants in STEM fields does not have a comparison with those schools.
We did have a follow-up. You said you looked at some schools in the Big Ten. Are there any comparable schools to what we have here?
You know, again, because of the nature of having research assistants in such large number, but because we were looking at, in particular, what laws apply. Being a public institution, we're under state labor law, not national. So instead of, you've heard of schools that talk about the National Labor Relations Board, we are under the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board, and the relevant labor law is PIRA. And in looking at any possible institutions that are in Pennsylvania that are public and therefore subject to PIRA, the one institution that came up is Temple. It does have a graduate student union, a graduate assistant union. And there again, we did a dive into it to see how we compared. And in every metric that we looked at, and we brought a comparison table for those of you who are interested, you can pick one up on the way out, along with a summary of some other facts about graduate education at Penn State. All of the metrics we looked at, things like stipends, for example, our minimum stipend is higher than the highest minimum stipend at Temple, where they aggregate them by broad disciplines. Things like health benefits and tuition grants are prorated based on the type of appointment. Here, you all get a full tuition grant, regardless of what type of assistantship appointment, and you all get the same full subsidy in terms of 80% if you're an individual being covered, and up to 76% for family coverage of a platinum health insurance plan. So in many ways, there is really no benefit to the long duration that Temple has had a union. And there are other distinctions. It's a relatively small bargaining unit. And again, there were distinctions made for students who get an academic benefit, in other words, largely research assistants, who can not be in the bargaining unit if they declare an academic benefit. That does not apply in the decision that was made for Penn State. Whether or not you get an academic benefit from your assistantship responsibilities, and again, most of our students on research assistantships, you're doing your dissertation, your thesis research, you would be in the bargaining unit regardless. So it's very different than the situation at Temple.
You mentioned stipends in that answer, and one of the most common questions we received over the last couple of weeks is, will my stipend go up or down? Can you answer that?
This is the challenge with predicting the future. It is absolutely impossible to tell you what would happen to things that could be the subject of collective bargaining. So again, a union has a focus on what are called terms and conditions of employment. If the outcome of an election is to have union representation and there is an attempt at collective bargaining, I cannot tell you, no one can tell you at this point what would happen to items that might be the subject of collective bargaining, and that could include stipends, what are called benefits, that could be your health insurance plan, your tuition waivers, all of those things would have to be negotiated. And the nature of collective bargaining is there is a requirement for what's called good faith effort at bargaining, so the parties have to meet, they have to consider proposals on both sides, but there is no legal requirement for any side to make a concession and accept the other's terms. And in fact, there's no legal requirement to have an agreement at the end of that. So I can tell you right now if stipends would go up. They might go up for some, they might go down for others. they might not change. It's really not possible to tell you that right now.
I would just weigh in on the other side of this too, that since Jean has been the Dean of the Graduate School, how long is that? 3.5 years?
Officially, yes.
Officially 3.5 years. One of her priorities, and it is a priority in the Graduate School's strategic plan, and fully supported by the senior administration at the university, is to pay attention to our graduate student experience, and in particular, the living conditions for graduate students. We realize that you're, as students, not here to become wealthy, most of you, maybe later, but not right at this moment. But Jean and her team at the Graduate School have demonstrated a real commitment to raising the minimum stipend levels across the university, which includes eliminating some of the lowest salary bands that existed and minimizing application of others, all with a commitment to raising the standard of living for our graduate students. And I think I commend Jean for her success in that. This is not easy. The money has to come from somewhere, but Jean and her team have really been committed to that, and she's not done.
And I'll just throw out a number for all of you. I went back and looked within the last decade. The average stipend has gone up 43% at Penn State. So I think that at least gives you a reasonable idea that this is on a consistent trend. And right now, when we compare our average stipend to the 5 Big Ten schools that do have grad assistant unions and report to an AAU database, we are higher than those schools that report, even within the ones that have graduate assistant unions.
Last year is actually a good example. Just very quickly, some of you may recall that there was a bit of a delay in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania approving an appropriation for Penn State. That meant that we were in a little bit of a holding pattern in terms of making commitments to students and faculty and staff about salary increases. Jean made a very strong case to me, which I passed on to the president and ultimately was approved by the board, that we couldn't wait for the normal process to run through, because it was important that we commit to the salary increase for our graduate students early and separate from the general salary increase that was ultimately approved for faculty and staff. And so I think that's a good example of Jean really advocating very strongly on your behalf for stipend increases.
We've had several versions of this question come in today. It seems to be from several questioners that there are certain schools that would favor unionization more than other schools as a group, and they're wondering if it would be possible to have some colleges be a union and other colleges not.
I'm going to answer this first. No, Jean.
Here again, we're subject to what the decision of the hearing examiner of PLRB was, which was based on having an assistantship or a traineeship of any type. And so I'm going to go to the very edge of my limited knowledge about labor law in Pennsylvania, because there is also a rule that has to do with not having over-fragmentation, that may not be the right pronunciation of it, and not wanting to have very small micro units in an organization. But at the end of the day, the decision was all graduate students with assistantships or traineeships, and therefore it would be a bargaining unit that would span not just the different colleges here at University Park, but we have graduate assistants at other Penn State locations, at Hershey in the College of Medicine, at Penn State Harrisburg, Capital College, and we have a few assistants at other graduate centers in the state. And so it would be one bargaining unit across all of those.
This probably goes without saying, but just in the interest of clarification, it also could not be split up between teaching assistants and research assistants at this point.
That's absolutely right. It would not be divided up by the types of responsibilities.
We just had.
That's not an institutional decision, that's a decision of the PLRB.
That's correct.
We just had a follow-up come in from the audience that if stipends are the subject of negotiation, would every grad student in every program receive the same stipend no matter what college or program they're in?
Again, we can't predict what would be the outcome of a collective bargaining agreement until there's a signed contract, because both parties come to the table, make proposals. They can be rejected, they can be renegotiated, but at the end of the day, we don't know. I do think it's fair to say, because of the nature of how assistantships are funded, in terms of the funding sources, there are some general funds that we call them that are money that comes to the university largely through tuition, and that goes out to all of the academic units for instructional budgets, and almost any department that has graduate assistantships and graduate programs, to some extent, graduate assistantships, some portion will be funded with those internal institutional monies. A lot of our students that are in STEM fields will have funding from faculty grants and contracts as well. But even in those programs, it's very common for your first year in the program to be on an assistantship that's funded with university funds internally. So it is hard to say, but it's very likely, if there were hypothetically a negotiation to significantly raise minimum stipends, and it was necessary to move those general funds from some departments and colleges to others, that stipends could go down in certain departments and programs. Really hard to tell you until a contract would be finalized.
Another question from the audience. This questioner says that there's clearly some students that feel that they are being mistreated by faculty members, and they want the protection of the union to stand up for them. So what is the university doing to address these concerns?
I want to tell you, as the not only the dean of the graduate school, I'm a faculty member at the university, and I have been in the graduate school as an administrator for about 18 years now. There is nothing that we take more seriously than the welfare of our graduate students. In the time I have been in the graduate school, we have made a point of having policies that are transparent, policies and processes that are transparent and that are intended to assure that graduate students have pathways and formal avenues to have concerns like that addressed. The first level that we always encourage, and this is true for any problems, is to try to resolve it locally, to talk with your faculty advisor. If there is a problem with your advisor, the head of the program, that can be your department head or a faculty member in charge of the program, is the next avenue. But ultimately, in every college, there is an associate dean, usually a college administrator for graduate education, that is the next level that you can file a grievance with, and that individual will look into it and will work to adjudicate it. But ultimately, if it can't be resolved by that college administrator, the Associate Dean for Graduate Student Affairs that I mentioned at the beginning, which is currently Dr. Sarah Ades, that individual has jurisdiction across the entire university for all graduate programs, all graduate students, and a grievance can reach her if necessary, and she will work within the college and in the department and bring other offices in as needed to resolve the problem. And I can tell you, we have addressed problems with students where we have resolved them. And in many cases, I will also say this, we often have students say, I do not want you to have to go and talk to my advisor directly. They do not want that type of confrontation. And we will find ways of working behind the scenes. We may work with the department head or the college directly to help resolve it, but we also respect what a graduate student's preference is in terms of how that grievance, if you will, or problem needs to be addressed. In a union environment, that type of backdoor behind the scenes is not possible. It's a different process. And that process would also be something that would have to be specified in a collective bargaining agreement.
I can see I've got to be ready quicker if I'm going to get in ahead of Jean, but I will say at the end, there's always me. As the university's chief academic officer, ultimately I have responsibility for all of our academic programs and all of the people in it, and that includes graduate students. So Jean described the process. If there are issues with poor working conditions, mistreatment, any kind of abuse that cannot be resolved or a challenge to be resolved at lower levels, ultimately these will flow up through my office, and I can tell you that I take a dim view of any kind of abuse and further any type of retaliatory conduct that may occur as a result of somebody bringing a legitimate concern forward. This is something we take very seriously. It's part of our institutional values. It is very important, and I report directly to the president, and I can channel him also by saying that this is something we take very seriously at the highest levels of the administration.
This person writes that many unions currently are advocating for bigger changes, environmental, social, things of that nature. What would a graduate student union be able to negotiate beyond stipends, benefits, things like that?
You know, these are extremely important issues that impact all of us. I will tell you, one of the amazing things about being at a research university is some of the most impactful ways that we actually are able to work on some of those societal issues is through the research that gets done at Penn State. But I also have to say that unions have very narrow boundaries of what they legally are able to address. And as I said at the beginning, the category is terms and conditions of employment. They don't have legal authority to work on those other things. But as a university community, that is clearly, those are areas where we all need to work together, and we do on those.
As Jean said, if you are passionate about something, one of the great things about a university, and particularly a university that's as large as Penn State, is we have all kinds of grassroots and even more formal advocacy groups that address many of these issues. So if you're passionate about environmental concerns, there's any number of groups that are focused in different areas in which you can participate. And I can tell you that many of these advocacy groups will bring their ideas and suggestions forward to the administration. I get lots of emails, lots of meetings on a regular basis, and they're always great ideas, and I always love to hear. I wish I could always say yes. I can't always say yes, but these are great things to come forward. We don't anticipate those coming through a union structure. We anticipate them coming through the passion of our students that is manifest in these independent advocacy groups.
Another question just in from the audience. If a union is formed and later down the line students decide that they're not happy with that situation, can it be dissolved?
No. I shouldn't say no. Legally there is a process, but my understanding is it's very, very difficult. There is a certain time frame after a union is certified before you can even consider changing that. Because it is a legal process and it requires legal representation, which means attorneys, and students who might not want to be in the union any longer would have to have legal representation to follow the process necessary. Once there is collective bargaining agreements, there's a window before a bargaining agreement would expire before something like that could be pursued. So our understanding is within Pennsylvania, it is almost never occurred that once a union is certified, that it would be decertified and the union would no longer exist. And so fundamentally, the outcome of the election, where you will be making a decision about whether to be represented by a union, is a decision that is going to stay with graduate education at this university for the indeterminate future. It will impact all of you who are here through the end of your programs. It will impact future students who aren't even here yet or haven't even applied. So you really do want to put a lot of thought into this.
There seems to be some confusion still about who would be affected by this new union. Could you clarify that and also specifically mention how it would affect fellowships?
Okay, that was very specific in the decision from the hearing examiner. Again, the individuals who would be in a prospective bargaining unit if the election is for union representation are graduate students on assistantships and traineeships. It specifically excluded students who are on fellowships. So in any given semester, if you move from an assistantship to a fellowship, and that is not uncommon at Penn State, we're actually very proud of the fact that we have a lot of fellowships. In any given semester, there are over about 440 fellows, graduate students on different types of fellowships. It doesn't matter if your fellowship is internal. It might be an endowed fellowship in your college. You could be on an NSF fellowship. You could be on any kind of fellowship. You would not be in that semester in the bargaining unit. But it's very common, in fact, it's almost uncommon for a student to be supported for the entire time they're at the university on a fellowship. Even NSF fellows, we have quite a few of you here at the university. Your years on tenure on that NSF fellowship are limited in number, and they generally do not cover the entire time to degree. So you would be on assistantships most of the time when you're not supported on the fellowship. So you would be moving in and out of the bargaining unit, but not in the semester when you are on a fellowship.
I believe you mentioned time towards degree at that point. We've had a lot of questions on that coming in. And would there have to be a clear distinction between time for employment and time towards degree or dissertation?
Well, time, when we talk academically about your time to degree, it is the amount of time for you to complete all of your degree requirements, your course requirements, and because the vast majority of students who are on assistantships at Penn State are in PhD programs, about 83 to 85% of all the assistantships are held by students who are in PhD programs. That average time to degree is about 5 years on average across all 93 PhD programs we have. It's a little bit less in certain disciplines and a little bit more in others, but on average it's 5 years. The assistantships that are offered generally run fall and spring academic year appointments. A student can come in the middle of a year and be on a one semester appointment. And so one of the things I think is a bit of a misconception is if there is a union and there's a collective bargaining agreement, and let's just say hypothetically it might be a 5-year contract, I don't know. It does not mean that students are guaranteed an assistantship for 5 years. It simply means that the terms of that contract would be for the term 5 years in this case. But generally the things that are not negotiated, that are the purview of, I hate to say management, but the university, would be who gets an assistantship, who it is assigned to, whether you get it the next year or not, for example. And so you really do want to differentiate the idea of support for your time to degree, which we strive to do academically for our students in order to help you complete your degree. The goal of the graduate school for all graduate programs is to provide you with support until the median time for your degree program. That is not a guarantee in a collective bargaining agreement.
One of the things that I'm sure many of you are noticing, I'm certainly noticing, is that in a lot of Jean's responses, she effectively prefaces her response by saying, well, it's not entirely clear, or she conveys that through the explanation. And that's important to note that that is actually the case, and that Jean is being, I think, honest in her sharing that uncertainty with you. We would love, in many of the questions that you're asking, to say the answer is 4, or the color is green, or the direction is up. But there is a lot of uncertainty in this process, and there is a lot of uncertainty associated with the outcome, and it would be disingenuous and dishonest of us to suggest that there is certainty if we move in this direction. So in Jean trying to convey that, she really is trying to share with you that there are a lot of questions that have not been answered and will not be answered until a negotiation ultimately takes place, if that is to be the outcome.
The question we've received is, the university has made their position clear prior to this, so why should graduate students accept at face value everything you have to say?
Okay, so I'm going to weigh in on that. I'm going to get in front of Jean on this one.
Really? Because I want to answer that.
And weigh in from the institutional perspective. And I suspect that my response could be met with the same skepticism that question conveys. But Penn State has a set of core values. Value number 1 is integrity. And these are values that are just not 6 words on a piece of paper. These are values that the institution lives by. So Jean and I are here today not to try to present bad facts to you or fake news, but to really convey to you, to the best of our ability, accurate information and our sense of where we are in this process and where it goes from here. And I can just assure you, I've worked with Jean for a long time, that she has absolute integrity. I would like to feel that I can say the same thing about myself. We are conveying to you, I think, in as forthright and frank and honest a way as we can, our understanding of the facts of this case. There are many different opinions floating around there, but we are trying to convey as truthfully as possible what we believe the facts to be. Jean, you look like you want to weigh in as well. So.
Well, you said it. You've said all the important points, but I would also point out the reason that I got a PhD, and I acknowledge I'm a STEM person, is I have been always compelled to want evidence and data and facts in making decisions. And I would say to you that the hallmark of being at a research university and getting an advanced degree, and especially a research degree, which is most of you who have assistantships or fellowships are in, is that you look at problems. You should be learning to look at problems based on facts and evidence. And you also, I think, in your own disciplines and in your own research, recognize that complex issues are complicated, that there is no simple single dimension to really looking at a complicated issue. I know when I get asked a question in my discipline, and I hate getting asked questions by people outside of my field, because people want simple, one-dimensional answers. And I almost can't start an answer without "it depends." And I think all of you sitting here understand what I'm talking about. The more you know about an issue, the more complicated you recognize it is, the more dimensions, and the more you have to dig into the facts and the details. And that's what we encourage you to do, and that's why we've worked so hard to look at the factual information and put so much of that detail up in the resources that we have, including the website we've mentioned, the GradFacts website. There's a lot of information there. It's very weedy and detailed, but that's necessary when you have something this important that you have to make a decision about.
We have a specific question, but it's one we've received several variants of. And if someone has accepted an offer and they said they chose Penn State in part because of the offer that was given to them, would that original offer stand that they signed, or would they be subject to whatever is negotiated in the future?
That's an interesting question. I'm sure everybody here, if you're a graduate student and you were given an offer to come, there was an academic decision, an academic offer of admission, but in most cases when we're talking about graduate education and our programs, especially the research programs, you were offered some support package. We consider those letters of offer to be a firm commitment to you about the circumstances when you come here for your support. It's very common for students to be offered multi-year offers of support in many programs so that you can achieve your time to degree contingent on making good academic progress with those expectations. And there is an expectation that departments and programs hold to that. And in fact, I can tell you, we intervene if a student comes to us and says that that's not the case. If there were a decision based on this election coming up to have union representation, first of all, I can tell you that it's typically, as I understand from folks who have done this a lot, it can be a very lengthy process to negotiate a first contract. It's not uncommon for these to take at least a year. And because I was interested in looking around at our peer institutions, I've talked to most recently Rutgers, where they do have a graduate assistant union, but most recently they had a postdoc union finalized. It took them 3 years for their first contract, 3 years from the start of negotiations. So what would happen to the support that you're on right now? It was certainly, my understanding is, at least the commitments that are made to you would be to every extent adhered to, but we would not be able to make, generally not be able to make changes until that collective bargaining agreement were finalized. But it would depend. I don't want to say absolutely because I am not a legal expert on this. But it's possible that certain things could not be changed even if it was desirable to do so.
We're coming to the close here, and we've had some specific questions about moving forward. There's been tentative dates announced. Is there anything definite, and what will students who wish to vote but might be off campus during this time, how will their votes be recorded?
So I know that there were some dates that were put out there. They are tentative at this moment. They are not official. They become official when we receive an official notice from the PLRB. And that will happen when there has been the actual locations, like where will you go to vote, and the times when you will be able to go to vote. So when those things are finalized for University Park, for Hershey, and for Harrisburg, there will be an official notice that will be sent to us, and I assume to PSEA as well, to CGE. And when we receive that official notice calling for an election, that has the information in it. It will have the dates and the times and so on. All of that information will be sent individually to each and every one of you who is eligible to vote. So every single graduate student who holds an assistantship or a traineeship this semester will receive individually through your email. So check your filters. Be sure it doesn't get sent to junk mail. You will receive that notice. It will also be publicly posted. So we are required to publicly post the notice and all of the names of the eligible voters We're looking to see where the best places to put those postings are, but it's actually hard copy. So the entire notice and the entire list of eligible voters will be physically in hard copy available for everyone to look at. And we will have reminders sent out to everyone so that you are aware. At this point, there will be 4 days for voting at University Park because this is where the majority of the eligible voters are, the vast majority.
We have worked hard to plan polling places that are convenient. So it's not all in one place all 4 days. We're moving the polling places around. So hopefully one of them will be closer to you than the others.
Right. Again, there's 4 days here at University Park, a different location each of those days, and slightly different hours, but they have not been finalized. So I'm reluctant to say anything, and then if it changes, I don't want to be putting out misinformation. But I think it will be pretty soon when that can be finalized, and those will be made known to all of you. And so, again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for everyone to vote, because the outcome, and we've said this repeatedly, this is not like electing a president where there's an electoral college. There isn't even a quorum system. It's a straight majority. So however many eligible voters show up and vote, if it's 100, then 51 of you decide for all 3,800. And so it's really, really, really important that everyone go and vote so that this really does represent your voices.
We have just a couple of moments left, and I'd like to apologize. We didn't get to all of the questions. We received close to 200. We will do our best to get them all answered to you. If you didn't get any of your questions answered, please resubmit them to questions@psu.edu, and we'll try to either respond in one group or directly as it seems fit. Would either of you like to make some closing statements?
Very, very briefly. I know we've covered a lot of information today, and as our moderator mentioned, there are a lot of questions we haven't been able to get through. We were really pleased to see the interest in this and how many questions have been submitted and how many of you have shown up today. So I would encourage you to visit that website, gradfax.psu.edu. That's up on the screen there. There is a very, very extensive list of FAQs. I know how pressed you all are for time, how busy you are, but this is important enough that it really justifies reading through all the information that's on there. We have a couple of handouts if you want to grab one on the way out that has some summary information and that URL. And we encourage you, you can still send questions if we haven't answered them. And you didn't even get a chance to submit them here, you can send your questions to gradinfo@psu.edu. That's also on the GradFax website. And just know that we're committed to providing answers to questions that are submitted to that email address if they haven't been answered otherwise. So thank you.
We'll just share that this Saturday afternoon, I'm driving to Pasadena, California. Not from here, from LAX, to actually connect with my doctoral advisor. Yes, it is hard to believe, but Jean and I both were once graduate students. And so I managed to reach out to him, and I'm going to connect with him. When he emailed me back, he said, what are the arrangements? Where should we meet? And I said, wherever's convenient for you. He said, well, why don't you come to the lab and I'll leave the back door open and you can come in and come up to my office. Well, it's been order 35 years since I last did that, but it did remind me of the last time I did that, which was a particular time in my graduate career where I was really struggling with where I was in my dissertation research. I had some family challenges that I was working through, had a conversation with my advisor late in the afternoon, and he said, look, I'm sorry, but I really have to go because I have another commitment. But what are you doing this evening? because why don't you come back and I'll come back later on and we can get together and have a conversation and talk through the issues that you're having on both fronts. And we did that, and I still remember staying with him until about 11 o'clock or 11:30 that evening to talk those things through. It did remind me, in the context of our earlier points, about the very special nature of the relationship between a graduate student and his or her advisee, and reminded me how he, as my advisor, watched out for my best interest. And I know that the department that I was in and the school that I was in, as well as the institution I was in, took care of us as well. When I was having those challenges, I did not need a third party to intervene on my behalf or to be an intermediary. It was the relationship that I had with my advisor, with my department, that really got me through. And here I am now, I'll say it, 35 years later, and it's still the same game plan for Saturday as it was all those years ago. So I wanted to finish on just that slightly personal note, but really to say thank you all so much for being engaged in this process and being sufficiently engaged that you showed up tonight to participate in this conversation. We hope it was useful. We, Penn State, will continue to communicate about this process. As you heard from Jean, we don't have all of the T's crossed and I's dotted yet, but as soon as we know more, we will make sure that we share it with you. And I would just reiterate the 3 points that I made at the beginning. Please do everything you can to get the facts, the real facts, avoid any miscommunication, educate yourselves, think about it, listen to people's opinions, but at the end of the day, form your own, make your own decision, and then perhaps most importantly, vote. Okay? Your voice is important, and we need you to vote. So thank you all very much for coming. Really appreciate your time and participation.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank, please go ahead. I'd also like to thank everyone who attended in person and online, and especially those of you who asked questions today, and to the two of you who answered them. Thank you all again, and good night.